Hi, I'm Faith McLaughlin with Clean TV. It is my privilege to introduce you to one of the world's foremost experts on cars, Robby Dilmore, or better known as the Christian Car Guy. Robby's talk show can be heard nationally on Sirius Satellite Radio Channel 161, as well as on Truth Broadcasting. Today, you will learn the basics about cars, from everything from how to purchase a car, proper maintenance for your vehicle, and how to get top dollar for it when it's time to sell. Robby Dilmore is a second-generation car guy. His father, Bob Dilmore, worked for Buick Motor Division for 17 years and now is a CEO of an automobile consulting firm. Robby worked in the automobile retail business for 35 years, working his way up from a car washer lot boy to a service manager to general manager and finally to being the majority stockholder for a Chrysler Dodge Jeep dealership for 10 years up until January 2008. And now, without further ado, a man you can trust with your car and your car needs, Robby Dilmore, the Christian Car Guy.
The reason I started the Christian Car Guy show was that every day as a car dealer, for 35 years I was selling cars, and God knew it was breaking my heart to watch people come in and trade perfectly good cars for perfectly good cars. Often they would owe $10,000, $12,000 more than their car was worth, yet they wanted to trade to get the latest and greatest in spite of the fact that their car might even still be under warranty, and they would go into debt that would just be astounding. So the Lord laid it on my heart to start the show to talk about what a trap that is, that most people don't realize these cars will go as long as you do. Rachel was on my show here last Saturday. She had has a 1964 Mercury Comet that has 540,000 miles on it. She had the car since it was new, and she bought lifetime batteries. I bought a lifetime battery, and over the period of the years, she's got 16 new batteries for free. She's gotten 7 new mufflers, and the whole time, think how little she was spending on transportation. The truth is, if you take care of your car, it'll last as long as you do, and you don't have to go into these crazy amounts of debt. But considering you are in the market to buy a car, you need a car, there's legitimate reasons that you need to buy a car. You know, one is you may be a new driver and that's your first car, or it may be you had a horrible accident and you had a total loss where you had to replace your car, or perhaps your job changed and all of a sudden you need more room or more space, those kind of things. So there are legitimate reasons to buy a car. And when that happens, you know, the question that we're going to ask is, do we want to buy a new car or do we want to buy a used car? Well, I think that in a lot of cases, people don't realize that they're going to have a used car within 2 or 3 weeks of the time that they buy that new car. And often you can buy a 1 or 2 year old car and save literally thousands, because cars depreciate, most people don't realize this, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% the first year. So if possible, take a look at least to see if the model that meets your needs is available in a 1 or 2 year old car. So then, you know, how do you go about deciding, am I going to buy that from an individual or am I going to buy it from a dealer? Do I lease it? Do I purchase it? Well, let me tell you a short story about leasing. When leasing first came out, I worked for a large chain of dealerships, and they sent me to leasing school, which I realized wasn't honest. I mean, they were basically telling the customers that this was the same thing as purchasing a car and it would put them in a great position. The position it puts them in is in 2 or 3 years, they're going to be without a car, without any equity, and it's going to force them to come back and buy a car from the dealer time and again. That wasn't the part that really disturbed me, was that the way they handle the pricing in a lease is not the way they handle it in a purchase. And actually, this dealer would not disclose the price, they just disclose payments. And so by focusing on the payment, the customer would lose track of what they were paying for the car. I called the dealer and said, you know, I just can't do this. It's just, it isn't honest. He said, Robby, they're not buying the car, they're renting it. So when you look at a lease, be careful of, you know, what are you actually paying for that car? Make sure it's very similar to a purchase if you're going to go on and lease. But I really strongly recommend you look at a used car that's 1 or 2 years old and go with something that doesn't take that first year depreciation. So then are you going to buy it from a dealer or are you going to buy it from an individual? You know, that's one of the questions that people ask. Well, there's advantages to both. Interestingly, the average price that somebody pays from an individual is quite a significant amount more than they pay from a dealer. So the idea being, well, I'll save by buying from an individual isn't necessarily true. The other thing about buying from a dealer is that generally they are going to stand behind what they sell more than an individual will stand behind what they sell. So it isn't true that you necessarily need to go with an individual or you need to go with a dealer. There's, again, benefits to both. The important thing is obviously that you get a particular car that you need and want, and you don't get in the trap of buying the first one that you see or feeling like you have to buy it before it gets away, and doing your homework and taking time to do that kind of thing. Then the next thing is, how are you going to locate it? And you're going to use a person. Do you know somebody in the car business, or are you going to use a computer? Well, today, with the internet, it's pretty easy. You can go on autotrader.com and say, I want a car within 15 miles of here, and find thousands of vehicles that are available, and you can hone down to a very specific color and whatever. So computer is pretty handy, and it's a great way to go. But if you have a friend in the car business, you might be surprised at what resources they have in order to reach auctions and other places that they would be able to get you a car. As the Bible says, be anxious for nothing, but in all things, with prayer and supplication. So prayer is a big part of this as well. And with prayer, you're going to find that the Lord might turn you on to where many counselors plan to succeed, where you can go with different people who can help you out with that purchase. So now that you're sitting there thinking, well, I've got to do my homework. I've got to figure out what kind of car that I want. What kind do I need? Do I need a domestic car? Do I need a foreign car? It's fascinating to find sometimes that the domestic car that is like the Toyota Camry or the Honda can be thousands less and can be relatively the same car. My own car, my wife's car, is a Dodge Stratus. It now has well over 120,000 miles on it. Been a great car, never had any issues, but it was $6,000 less than the Camry. We just got back out over 30 miles to the gallon. So when selecting a car, you don't necessarily have to go with the import car. You can often find a domestic car that will save you nearly as much money. Now, assuming you found the car that you want, and now how are we going to decide, is this a good car or a bad car? Well, I always said, $50 or $75 could save you a gob of money. I could spend some time outside and show you all the techniques of finding that the car's been repainted and all those things, but it's easier for you and really better for you to take it to a professional. If it's a Toyota, take it to a Toyota store. If it's a Honda, take it to a Honda store. For $50 or $75, they'll check the car out. They'll tell you it needs this, it doesn't need that. Of course, they're trying to sell work, so they're going to find things that it needs, but also they'll be able to tell you by putting it up on a rack, was it painted, and those kind of things. And again, the pedigree of a car is extremely important. When you're looking at a car, who owned it before, how many owners did it have? If you can get a Carfax, if it's available, has it been involved in a wreck or an accident? Those things are all part of evaluating how much the price is. Just because it was in a wreck does not necessarily make it a bad car. But if you're going to buy a car that you want to last you for your lifetime, obviously you're probably going to want to start out with a really good one, with a really good, clean pedigree, that you know how it was serviced. They kept those good records, and you can see that. My father once told me, Robby, you can't put too much money in a good car, and you can't put too little money in a bad car. So if you're going to start out with that transportation plan, which I think is at the heart of is having an idea of a long-term, I'm going to keep this car 10 years, I'm going to keep this car 20 years, something where you don't continually get into that cycle of debt, that's going to require a really good car to begin with, and doing your homework and making sure that car's been checked out is a good way to go when you're looking at selecting that car. Now that you've selected that car and had it checked out by some professionals, it's time to check it out for yourself and your family. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen customers make over the years is they don't take a long enough test drive. I don't know of a dealer or somebody trying to sell a car that won't let you take it overnight. Because what you need to do is you need to drive it on the highway a little bit, see if it's going to hurt your back. A lot of folks have back problems. I can't tell you the cars I've had to take back because the car hurt somebody's back. And does it fit in your particular garage? How does it look in your driveway? How does your family fit in it? All those things can be experienced when you take it and keep it. They call it puppy dogging, and the idea may be to get you to fall in love with the car. But actually, if you've had the car checked out and this looks like it may be the one, it's a good time to have at least a 24-hour sort of time with the car. You might want to go 48 hours. I've known people to keep a car for 3 days. If you're going to keep this car for the rest of your life, like my friend Rachel did, you want to make sure that you've got the one for you. So now you've had a time to experience the car. what are we going to do about this price? You know, this negotiation thing, it has so many people intimidated. Well, hopefully you've done your homework and you have a pretty good idea of what you feel like the car is worth. Well, simply put, we found from the olden days, you just make an offer of what you feel like the car is worth, but don't be playing. Don't try to offer less than you think the car is worth and go back and forth. Just be straightforward and tell a person, this is what I'm willing to pay for it. I'm not negotiable on this. This is what I feel, and give them a straightforward offer. And then be prepared to wait and follow up. I can tell you, there's a lot of people I sold a car to at a price I never thought I would, because for weeks they would call me and say, Robby, are you ready to take my offer? Now, that doesn't mean you come with a ridiculous offer and you keep wearing them out, because my car might get sold out from underneath you. But if you know you've got a legitimate offer and that's a fair price, and you've checked with other counselors, people that know what the car is worth, just stick to your guns, keep asking. You know, that car is costing them money every day it's on the lot, or if they're still making payments on it, whatever the situation is, the car is not going to be worth any more 2 weeks later. So at some point in time, you can get together on that price. And as I always say, the three things that you never want to leave out of buying a car, the three most important things, are number one, pray. God has a car for you, and the other guy's price is infinitely high. So prayer is a key thing. Number two, buy a safe car. It won't cost you an arm or a leg. And number three, with many counselors, plan to succeed. Get help. Don't be afraid to ask me. You can always go to ChristianCarGuy.com, email me. You can even call me, however you can do it, or find somebody in the car business that you trust, because we know things about cars and certain histories on cars and things that could really save you a lot of money and a lot of time, and because of the safety issues, maybe somebody's life. Along the lines of being a good steward, of course, you can see I would prefer that you kept your car forever, but the other parts are, how much can you save on gas? You know, so many people waste so much money on gas. It's estimated that Americans waste $96 million a week on gasoline. Can you imagine that amount of money back into the economy, or more importantly, back into your pocket? So I wanted to share with you what I consider to be Robby's most significant 20 best gas-saving tips. Well, number one, like in so many things in life, is prayer. Have you really talked to God about how you could save money on your gas budget? What should your gas budget be, and how can you go about adjusting that? And like we find out with so many management techniques, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so many people don't even check their gas mileage to see what they're doing. So one of the first and most important things you can do after prayer is to decide, gee, how much am I getting? And so that you can find out what differences you're making. Is it affecting how much mileage you're getting? Years ago, Volkswagen, you know, I wasn't always a Christian in the car business. In fact, I didn't come to Christ until 1991, but I worked for Volkswagen. And they had a thing where they would say that all your customers on these Volkswagens are going to come in saying they don't get good gas mileage, they don't get good gas mileage. And they would tell us, make sure and get the customer to give you some records of what kind of gas mileage they're getting. They said, better yet, and this was a little trick that they taught us, and it's an interesting example, though, of what you can learn from measuring your mileage. They said, take your customer out in the morning when they show up in the service drive and they say, look, I'm only getting 20 miles to the gallon. You say, well, your car really probably is getting 30. You're just not measuring it right. Take them down to the gas station and have them fill up the gas tank until it clicks, till it's just click, 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 till it's absolutely full. They said, make sure you do this somewhere close to a highway. Then go out on the highway, drive 15 miles out and 15 miles back, and see if the customer can put a gallon of gas back in their car. Showing them that clearly if you couldn't get a gallon of gas back in that Volkswagen, you must be getting 30 miles to the gallon, because we drove 30 miles and you couldn't put another gallon of gas in it. What they were actually doing was taking advantage of the fact that the gas was cold down in the ground, and when you put it into your tank, it would expand. And so they were going to manipulate you a little bit on how much gas mileage you were going to get. Well, one time, years later, I was selling cars. And this customer came up, and he looked at the window, and it said, gee, this Le Mans, it was a Pontiac Le Mans I was selling. He said, it says it gets 21 miles to the gallon. There's no way in the world this car gets 21 miles to the gallon. He just went on, and he was just wearing me out. And I said, I'm going to tell you, not only will this car get 21 miles to the gallon, I'll bet you this car will get 30 miles to the gallon. And if it does, will you buy it? And he said, yes. And so, again, this was before my Christian days. I took him out to the gas station and had him fill up the tank completely, and went out 15 miles up, 15 miles back, and then stood there and watched him for 20 minutes try to put a gallon of gas in the car, which wouldn't go. But it's an interesting thing that happened. Again, I've asked the Lord for forgiveness in this deception or whatever, but I met this man years later, and every time I saw him, he would say, Robby got 36 miles to the gallon. Robby got, he measured his gas mileage from then on out, and gas mileage became an important part of his life. And it's amazing how he affected the gas mileage in his car by just simply measuring it. So that's one of my #1 tips. Another tip that people don't think about is, how about your air filter? Now, of course, when you go to get your oil change, they may ask you about that. But if you think about it, your car breathes about as much air in 2 minutes as you will in 2 weeks. People don't realize the volume of air that goes through a car. So if you're getting a little hay fever, if you're getting a little pollen, and you can imagine what that air filter is collecting in a short period of time. So especially in the spring and in early summer, it's a good time to go ahead and make sure, if they hadn't changed the air filter, to do that. Because if not, your car, the way it burns gas is it's got to have oxygen. And that oxygen comes through the air. If that air filter is clogged, it's going to put way too much gasoline for the oxygen. It's going to affect your gas mileage. And that's one of the second biggest gas burners that I know of is your air filter. Another place that I'm afraid my wife is very guilty of this particular one is people keep tons of stuff in their car that they don't need. I call it junk in the trunk. You know, you got a 6-pack of Cokes, you got a bag of cat food. Well, that bag of cat food's 20 pounds. You have no idea the lengths that the manufacturers went to get weight out of that car. That mini spare, all that plastic, it wasn't a matter of it was less expensive. It was a matter they were trying to get weight out of the car, because when you go to try to get that car to lunge forward, it's that momentum that takes gas mileage. So go ahead and clear those things out of the trunk. Another one that we all need to be really careful of is tire pressure, because unless you're putting nitrogen in your tires, and you got a regular routine of that where the nitrogen will keep the levels right, as the temperature changes, the tire pressure changes. And so I recommend that at least once a month, get out that tire pressure gauge and check your tire pressure. If you think about it, if you've ever ridden a bicycle with flat tires, just go let the air out and try to push that bicycle up a hill sometime. You get an idea what your car's trying to do with underinflated tires. That's why you'll hear these hypermilers will actually overinflate their tires in order to increase the gas mileage. Don't ever do it. It's not safe. If you ever saw what a tire did at 100 miles an hour, it would scare you to death. So don't overinflate your tires. The maximum tire pressure is on your door if you're using the right tires. If not, it'll be on the tire. But keeping them at their maximum tire pressure can certainly save you a lot on gas. Another thing while you're talking about the tires is, how about the alignment? When you're looking at the tires, are they wearing funny? Is there an edge coming off? Do you feel the steering wheel pulling to the right or left? Is it going like this in your hand? Balance and alignment are another big factor in what's going on with your gas mileage. Hopefully, if you're tracking your gas mileage and now you're seeing, wow, I just got a front end alignment, you can see amazingly how much all of a sudden your gas mileage improves, because when you're not trying to push that tire down the road, all that friction is burning you gas. Another thing that you can do, the average person can do, and you can just check it out, again, you can't do it unless you're measuring, is to use synthetic oil. See, synthetic oils have less friction, and so by just simply switching to a synthetic, you know, when gas is at $5 a gallon, if it gets back there, it may be that everybody needs synthetic oil, because that little bit, 1 or 2%, may mean more than the price of the synthetic oil. Meanwhile, the nice thing about synthetic oils, a lot of people don't realize this, the newer, smaller engines burn a lot hotter, and they have hot spots and warm spots. Well, unfortunately, Toyota found this out with a sludge problem, that these new engines can't handle the old-fashioned oil. So you'll find Mercedes, BMW, those kind of people, the only oil you can use is a synthetic in those, because of the new temperature ranges that they're running. So synthetic oils truly provide your engine better protection and will keep some engines from having that sludge problem. So another way to save gas is synthetic oil. Of course, one of my all-time favorites, and probably the thing that I'm known for, is speeding. You know, I've always said, you know, if you're following Jesus, he's the guy in the right lane. If you were following him home from work, would you be blowing by him? Because Jesus would be obeying the law. But also speeding, as I mentioned, it wastes a tremendous amount of gas. And not only that, but just think about how you go to get speed. Jackrabbit stops and starts, you've heard that all along. But think about it from a standpoint of riding a bike. Riding a bike can give you a lot of examples of how to save gas. If you're riding that bike and you slam on the brakes and you come to a complete stop, how much harder is it to get to pedaling again than if you just eased on up and you were able to time it to where you didn't have to start pedaling again, you still had some momentum. Well, the same thing is true with your car. That momentum means everything. And by not speeding, you'll find that the lights are timed properly, and there's a lot of issues that you can take advantage of by just simply following the law. Another thing you can do is you can check octane levels. Some cars burn a medium grade octane, or they'll burn high test and actually get better gas mileage than they will on a regular. Again, it takes care from management and measurement, and as the price of gas varies, it may be better to use a mid-range. But a lot of people don't realize that they think that a high octane gas is going to have more power. Well, that isn't what it is at all. What happens is the flash point, the point at which that gasoline burns. And so what actually happens in that engine, if your octane is too low, the piston is coming up and the gasoline explodes in the cylinder before the piston gets up to the top. Well, it doesn't allow the piston to come all the way up to the top, and it starts it down, so you don't get a complete power stroke. Plus, you hear this awful ping. They used to say your engine was pinging. Well, the reason is that lower octane gas explodes easier than the higher octane gas, which seems kind of backwards, but that's the way it works. So by switching to a mid-grain gas, your car doesn't get that ping. The reason why that becomes even more important is with the new sophisticated computer systems, is the engine itself detects when it starts to ping. And what happens is that when the engine detects a ping, it does what they call retarding the timing, which means they're going to back down the time the spark plug fires. They're going to wait for that spark plug to fire until the engine's a little bit cooler. Well, when it backs down on the timing, guess what happens to your gas mileage? You're not getting that complete power stroke, and away you go. So again, this isn't the save-all. By going to high octane, your car's going to quit pinging, and all of a sudden you're going to get 40 miles a gallon. But it is worth a test. Try a mid-grade gasoline a little bit, see what that does to your gas mileage. Try a high octane. Again, all these things can be ways to adjust your gas mileage to fine-tune your experience. Again, another thing to mention about octane is the older a car is, the more carbon builds up in the cylinder and in the head. And so the older a car is, you might test a high octane with that car as well. Often they'll get significantly better gas mileage with high octane than an older car like Old Red with 280,000 miles on it. There is one myth I wanted to take out. A lot of people say, well, Robby, why are you running the air conditioner? You're Mr. Gas Mileage, what are you doing? Well, the truth is at 55 miles an hour, if you got a window down, it's the wind is costing you a lot more than if you had your windows up, because what a lot of people don't realize is 80% of the power at highway speeds of your car is used to pushing air. You see? And so if the idea is the problem is pushing air, by rolling down your windows, you're creating a significant amount of wind resistance. A sunroof is a death blow to getting good gas mileage, or one of those roof carriers. If you can possibly go on vacation and not use that S-Car Go, believe me, you can save a lot of gas, because, again, at highway speeds, 80% of your power is used to moving air. So everything you can do to create a better airflow is going to get you better gas mileage, even if you got to use that air compressor a little bit to create air conditioning in the car to cool off. All right, moving over a little bit more into the maintenance category of cars, one of the things I like to start out with is some car don'ts, common sense things that people don't realize that really can make a huge difference. One of the first ones, and a big one, just like in life, you don't want to operate without an owner's manual, i.e. the Bible. In a car, never operate a car without the owner's manual. They're easy to get. I don't care how old the car is. You can call the manufacturer. You can call a wrecking yard. You can find that owner's manual. But that owner's manual is the only way that you legitimately know what exactly was the right oil for that car, what was the right coolant for that car, how to start that car properly, how to maintain that car, when does it need a timing belt. All these things come from having the owner's manual. And so whatever lengths you got to go to, if you can't find one, you email me and I'll help you find one. But that owner's manual is a guide. A lot of people have no idea the extent of engineering that the manufacturers go to make sure that all the components work together. I can tell you that there is an engineer, all he does all day long is decide if that radio knob is going to affect the other components in the dashboard. Well, if you think they put that much time into a radio knob, think how much care they took to make sure you got the right oil, the right transmission fluid, the right coolant, all those things. It's in the owner's manual. I can't say it loud enough or hard enough. Get your owner's manual. Another don't that people do all the time, and really is a frightening thing, is that people don't realize that a dead battery puts out hydrogen. Hydrogen. If you don't recall, maybe from science class, or maybe you saw the Hindenburg at one point in time blow up, that's why you never, ever, ever, when you go to jump a battery, connect the dead car first. Connect the dead car second. In other words, you always want to take the car that's not going to get the spark. So you take and you put the positive cable on first, and you can go ahead and put that on the positive terminal of the battery, and now some of the cars will have a positive terminal that's not actually on the battery, which is more safe. But you put the positive cable on first, then you take the negative cable. The reason why you don't want to put that on the battery is, guess what? If it sparks, with that hydrogen, kablamo. And I can't tell you the injuries I've known over the years by people having a battery explode. The simple reason is they hooked up that negative battery cable right there, and that spark flashed with that hydrogen, and then you got the Hindenburg right under your hood. Not a good thing. So simply put, you just got to find some kind of negative. A negative or a ground that's in the car can be on the frame. It could be on the exhaust manifold. There's a lot of places you can find that's a negative, but you can tell once you've got the dead car hooked up, then go back to the live car again. You don't want to use the negative battery terminal on it because it might be putting out a little hydrogen. Hook up the positive. When you go to hook that negative on any kind of ground, you'll see that spark and you'll go, okay, I got a good connection, and then go ahead and start your car. It's a big safety must. I got this one from a listener one time. She said, Robby, tell everybody, don't shut your car door with the glass. It's not a pull strap. You can kind of imagine what happened with that. So if you're in the habit of shutting your car door by grabbing the glass, realize you're putting a lot of wear and tear on that, on the frame and on the window regulator, and it can be a real expensive repair, so you don't want to use that one. Another thing people don't realize is you don't not use your air conditioner in the winter. It's a don't, but the thing of it is your air conditioner system has oil that runs through it. And it keeps all the seals, you see, because one of the things that you'll always know is, gee, my air conditioner quit cooling. The reason why it quit cooling 9 times out of 10 is because there was no coolant. The reason it leaks out is because the seals didn't keep lubricated throughout the winter. So a lot of ways that you can use your air conditioner throughout the winter, no matter what part of the country you're in, is number one, when you're in the defrost mode. A lot of cars automatically turn on the air compressor, but if your car doesn't do it, push the little snowflake and make the compressor come on. It will dry the air out and do a better job of defogging. Or, and again, if you have fog in your car, the best thing to do is turn on the air compressor because it's going to dry out the air in order to defog it. But more importantly, it's going to keep those seals in the air compressor going so that you don't have those leaks and your air conditioner will last a lot longer. Another common mistake people make, another don't, is they click, click, click when they go to fill a gas. You know, they go, oh, I got gas at 262 this morning. You know, it was 285 yesterday. I need to fill it up and get every last drop of that cheap gas. Well, the problem is that a lot of people don't realize that in that filler neck, when you're click, click, click in the gas is coming up the filler neck. There's vents that are in that go over to what they call a charcoal canister. And so you're running pure fuel. In other words, the fuel, you're not saving anything. It's coming up in the filler net, and it's going down through your charcoal canister. And a lot of times you go, hey, my check engine light just came on right after I filled up with gas. Well, the reason is you filled up your complete evaporative system with fuel. One click, and you're good. Believe me, again, if you know your car takes 12 gallons and it's clicking at 5, you know that you were running it too fast. But if you know it's close to full and you hear it click, don't keep clicking it because it's going to cost you money. Another thing that people do that I've seen cost them money over the years is they want to wash their engine with a hose. Or even worse, with a pressure washer. They'll go to that car wash place, they'll take that pressure washer off, and they'll decide they're going to wash their engine off with a pressure washer, not knowing what you're doing. You're getting water in all sorts of electrical things that you don't need water in. If you don't know what you're doing, don't take a hose to your engine. All right, moving away from some of the don'ts and we'll move on to some of the do's, okay? So what are some of the things that you should do? One of the things you ought to do is wax your car once a season. A lot of people don't realize that your paint is kind of like the skin of your hand, because the metal underneath, as it gets hot, it expands like crazy, and guess what happens? The paint has to expand too, so it has pores in it. Well, what happens is, you can imagine that here's your poor car, it's sitting out there, and all of a sudden a bird flies over. Well, you kind of get the picture. All those pores are laid wide open, and guess what happens? In all those pores of that paint, well, then it cools off that night, the pores close down, and guess what they just did? Trapped all that acid down inside the paint, wearing it out, and you wonder why, you know, a week later when you clean it off, you got this big mark where that happened. The point of it is by waxing your car regularly, what happens is, if you think about it, when the sun heats the wax, it melts and fills those pores. And so when something happens, atmospheric fallout, whatever, a bird, when that falls, it just like the water, it will beat up off. So that wax, by waxing your car, will help fill those pores so things don't get in your paint. Your car will last a lot longer. You just need to do it about once a quarter. If you notice your car no longer beads the water, then you might think about using a wax. Again, once your car's waxed, you don't want to take some real heavy detergent. So you might look into getting some really nice car care products. Like any mechanic, your tools are kind of what the result of your product is. So a good Meguiar's car wash, a good car wax, their tire dressing, all those things will help add life and luster to your car. Moving on to the undercarriage, you obviously want to, especially if you're up north somewhere and you know that they use salt, pretty soon thereafter you want to go by a power wash place and go ahead and power wash off that undercarriage, because that rust will begin to eat at whatever there, even though it may be zinc or metal. Moving down to the tires, they're a key thing. If you want your car to look great, a good tire clean is kind of essential. Plus, by using a tire dressing, it keeps the outside of the tires from cracking, whatever, they'll last longer. Another thing I see people do that you've got to keep an aluminum wheel clean, but don't just go out and buy that wheel acid somebody told you about. Gee, go use the wheel acid, it's going to make your life a lot easier. If you don't know what you're doing, I've seen a lot of wheels, a lot of tires, a lot of people hurt badly with wheel acid. So unless you really know what you're doing, you may want to stay with that. There's a lot of good aluminum cleaners. Meguiar makes one that don't have the acid in them, and you can clean those wheels without endangering a lot of different things, including your driveway. Again, the interior of your car will last a lot longer if you keep it clean as well. And there's a lot of products that Meguiar's and other people make. Leather itself will dry and crack if you don't keep a cream on it, you don't keep it maintained. You've got your dashboard, Armor All makes product, Meguiar makes products to help keep those vinyls and plastic all going, especially if you leave your car out in the sun. Another way you can handle that is just get one of those cardboard covers to put out over the dash, because the dash is the part that's going to take the brunt of the heat. And if you're going to plan on keeping your car like my friend Rachel did, you're going to have to do something to protect those vinyl parts from the sun. Another thing that happens in cars that I would just talk about briefly is odors. And an odor can literally destroy the resale value of your car. And they come from a lot of different places. A lot of times you may have a water leak and you're smelling like, musty socks, and that may be something that you feel the water down in the carpet or something like that. But more often than that is people don't realize that must starts within their air conditioning system. And if you have a car that you have recirculation button on, and you're always keeping it in recirculation, you'll get that odor, because what we don't realize is that God's air has anti-germ agents in it. And if you'll bring fresh air into the car occasionally, when you first start out in the morning or when you're going home at night when it's a little bit cooler, go ahead and let the air conditioner go off recirculation so that you can get some of that fresh air in, and it will clean out that odor. Again, you can spray Lysol in that air conditioning system and get rid of the odor sometimes. And again, parts stores sell several deodorizers that'll kill the bacteria in an air conditioning system. But the other thing to note is, if you're driving your car and you're not familiar with what recirculation means, is that a car's air conditioner cannot cool the outside air past an ambient degree of 80 degrees. So if it's over 80 degrees outside and you're wondering why your car's air conditioning doesn't seem cold enough, put it on recirculate or on maximum. It's the same thing. Maximum is that same thing. Again, if you're leaving your car on maximum all the time, you're going to get that bacteria, you're going to get that musty sock odor, and that's why you want to take that off that switch. That leads us to more of the mechanical maintenance. What are some regular inspections I need to do on my car? Maybe once a month, maybe once every 2 months, depending on how often you're driving. But certainly before you go on a trip, there's certain things that you always want to check. The first thing you want to check certainly is fluid levels, because, and I can't tell you the engines I've seen blown and all the things that have happened, because a lot of people don't realize that engines, it's natural for them to burn oil. They're going to burn some of this actually good for the car. And that some of the manufacturers will allow an engine to burn as much as a quart every 1,000 miles before they say any warranty repair needs to be done to it. So your car, if you're waiting 4,000 or 5,000 miles to change the oil, it's very likely it could be 2 or 3 quarts low if it's just running under normal conditions. So check your oil. I know that now that we have self-service gas stations, we don't see that as regularly. And again, you want to make sure you're familiar with your dipstick, how that works. You want to be familiar with what your owner's manual says, the type of oil that you want to use, and those kind of things. The next thing is transmission fluid. A lot of people don't realize that you just don't stick the dipstick in there and check your transmission fluid. Again, you need to read your owner's manual, but in most cases, the car has to be running to check the transmission fluid. It has to be in park, and that's the way that you'll know whether or not it's right on the dipstick. Again, check your owner's manual to make sure that's how you check the transmission in your car. But certainly before you go on a trip, low on transmission fluid means a very hot transmission could mean a very bad trip. Power steering fluid usually has a little dipstick on the cap. You just simply unscrew the cap. You can look at the little dipstick. If that gets low, you don't know that all of a sudden you'll feel the steering wheel tighten up. You won't be able to turn, because it needs that power steering fluid in order to work. Before you go on a trip, check your power steering fluid. The coolant is another thing that obviously there's a reservoir over there. There's always evaporation going on, and you don't want your car to run cool and run hot. That's an issue. And then naturally, I'd save the best for last, brake fluid. As brakes wear, they create more need for brake fluid because that distance, as the brake pad wore out, you need hydraulic fluid in order to fill that distance. So if you've got 20,000 miles on that set of brakes, you may well not have enough in the fluid. And the last thing you want to have happen is all of a sudden a brake light come on while you're on vacation or something along those lines. They're usually a clear reservoir, easy enough to check. Your owner's manual again will show you where, and it'll show you the proper level to keep your brake fluid. It's a safety must. And then certainly, as we mentioned before, tire pressure. Before you go on a trip, you want to make sure that that's, from a gas mileage standpoint and all those things, you got to check your tire pressure. Now, I also was very fortunate when we did several shows over the years on the ultimate list. What should everybody have in their car? Before they go anywhere, what are necessary things that people ought to have in their car? And so we devised this list. Of course, you can always go to ChristianCarGuy.com and check out the exhaustive list, but I have just a few of the basics here. My number one on the list is an actual owner's manual for your life, a Bible. Nothing like having that handy, because you're listening to Christian radio, I hope, and all of a sudden the pastor laid something on you, pull over the rest area, and maybe you need to study that. But there's nothing like having God's Word at hand, because you never know when you may need to check out on something. Then a map. A map of the city you normally drive in, and again, now they have GPS and all those things, but it's nice to have an idea where you are, where you're going. Roadside flares are another thing that's on the list. A first aid kit, extra fuses. It can come in very handy at times, especially if you're out at night or something and all of a sudden you lose your dash lights. One of my wife's favorite, and something that I think is a real handy thing to have on your car, is baby wipes. I mean, they work great for checking the oil, or maybe you got a spill or all sorts of things. There's nothing like having some baby wipes in the car. A fire extinguisher, again, might be a good idea. And a lot of the insurance companies and body shops have an accident checklist. Certainly, if you have a young driver in your family, they're going to know someday you're going to get that call, Dad, I've been in an accident. And what do I do? Well, there's an accident checklist that you can get at most body shops and certainly from insurance companies that say, okay, make sure you get the other person's license. Be sure you call the police and get an accident report. And all those things that you're going to want to make sure that you get checked. So that accident list is a really good thing to have on board every single car. Regular maintenance. How often should I change my oil? What about these 30, 60,000 mile services? Are they trying to rip me off? And all those questions a lot of people have that just comes to regular maintenance. How often should I change my oil? Well, we talked a little bit earlier about in synthetic oils. Well, synthetic oils, they'll go extra mile. They'll go 5,000, 7,500 miles. So that's one way to extend the life of your engine oil. But a lot of people use what they call a multi-viscosity oil when they hear 10W40 or 10W30. What that's telling you is that oil will actually change its thickness or viscosity based on temperature ranges. What they don't realize is that when you get a multi-viscosity oil like that, it doesn't last as long. So a 10W30 oil really needs to be changed at 3,000 miles, or a 10W40. Now, if you go with a straight weight oil, which I actually prefer in most climates, like we live here in North Carolina, I would rather use a straight 20 weight or a straight 30 weight because I know the viscosity is going to stay and the oil holds up better, and you can go to 5,000 miles using the same viscosity. Again, depending on the area, if you live in a real dusty area, if you're doing a lot of city driving, if you're a taxi cab, all those things they offer, enter into the picture. But certainly, if you're using a multi-viscosity oil, you may want to consider changing that oil every 3,000 miles and the filter. And a lot of people that I know have had trouble with their transmissions, and that's one of the areas that I see that people really, there's a lot of different ways to go about servicing a transmission. And just because you take it to somebody doesn't, when they said they serviced the transmission, it doesn't necessarily mean they got done what the owner's manual recommended. And you see, there's a filter in a transmission just like that there is in a car, in a gasoline engine. And so you've got to change that filter when you change the transmission fluid. My father used to put it like this. It's like, you know, taking a shower and not changing your underwear. It doesn't do you any good. So you want to make sure that the people change the filter. The other thing that they don't realize is in an automatic transmission, a lot of the fluid, if they just pull the drain plug and let the fluid drain out, it won't come out of the catalytic converter because the torque converter. The torque converter holds a lot of the fluid, which the torque converter is the way the transmission actually works. I could just demonstrate that for a second if you didn't know, that it works kind of like two opposing fans. Inside that torque converter is one fan that's going this way and the other set of blades go this way. And so when the engine is spinning this fluid like this, you can imagine this fan on the other side starts to spin. But guess what? Good news, if you stop the car, there's a fluid coupling between you can stop this fan from spinning and this one will keep spinning, and that's actually how an automatic transmission works. Well, that part of the automatic transmission is called a torque converter. Unfortunately, it's full of fluid, and if you pull the drain thing and you don't actually hook a pump up to it to evacuate it, you don't get all the fluid out of the torque converter, and so you've got this old fluid. So you want to make sure that they change both the transmission filter and that they also evacuate the system to get all the fluid out to make sure you got a proper transmission service. All right, tire rotation, balance, and alignment, all those things are kind of critical. You feel them, you know, certainly when you're driving it. It affects a lot of things. If your car is out of alignment, not only do you spend a ton on tires, but it puts a lot of wear and tear on your front suspension, and it's going to put some wear and tear on your pocketbook when it comes to gas and extra parts. And so when you start to feel your steering wheel going to the right or the left, the first thing to check is your tire pressure. That one tire might be low. Second thing is if those tires are then you need to check your alignment, because that's one of those things. It's not unusual to go ahead and have your alignment done at a regular interval at, say, 12,000 miles or 15,000 miles. Certainly you want to rotate your tires at least every other oil change. So in my case, since I changed my oil at 3,000 miles, every 6,000 miles I'm going to rotate the tires. When they rotate them, it's also a good idea to balance them because the weights change and all those things. So those tires bounce up and down, and when you see those little cups in the tires, it's because the tires are bouncing up down. It's costing you gas. Again, it's hard on your shocks. It's hard on the suspension. Balance, rotation, alignment. Tires are a big deal. Another place I see people lose a fortune is on timing belts. And again, that's another critical reason why you need your owner's manual. Some engines have timing belts, some have timing chains. Most import cars, most overhead cam cars, use a timing belt. And most of the time, a timing belt needs to be replaced somewhere between 80 or 90,000 miles. The problem with those cars is if you don't change that timing belt and that timing belt slips, it will literally destroy your engine. So you're going, gee, I bought this Toyota. It was supposed to go 500,000 miles, and I'm having to replace the engine. Why? Because you didn't have your timing belt changed. So you need, again, to check that owner's manual. When does my timing belt need to be replaced? Radiator flushes. People think, well, I got the high-tech radiator fluid, I got special coolant and all these things. Well, I can't tell you the money I see people spend on radiators, because really every fall, or at least every other fall, you need a complete radiator flush because electrolysis. You learned about that in science class. Well, guess what? There's a lot of electrolysis that goes on in your radiator. And that fluid coming through there is running out and changing the, I forgot my word, the pH that's in your car, you know, the acid to base content, and it starts wearing away the radiator. And the longer the coolant's in your car, the more acid it gets. Not only does it wear out your radiator, but it actually starts to wear out the inside of the cooler part of the engine. So you want to make sure at least every couple of years that you do a complete radiator flush. And then when it comes to tune-ups, that's another big area of misconception. I hear people say, well, I need a tune-up. I laugh when I hear that anymore, because when I was growing up, a tune-up meant you get points and condenser, which were part of a distributor system that is no longer in existence. You would also get spark plugs. Well, things have changed a lot over a period of time. What used to be a tune-up is no longer necessary at all because distributors don't have points and condenser. It's all electronic, and so that stuff isn't necessary. Spark plugs in a lot of cases are titanium and all sorts of words, ionium and these things. Some of those will go 100,000 miles. So what is a tune-up anymore? Now that we have fuel injection, we don't have a carburetor. They're not rebuilding it. They're not adjusting it. It doesn't require adjusting. The computer does all that. So people say, well, you need a tune-up. Then I'm thinking I got somebody who really is not much of a mechanic. That would be my first reaction. And then I'd say, well, what exactly is involved in a tune-up? What is it that you want to do to tune up my car? Well, normally they'll say, well, it needs a 30,000 mile service or it needs a 60,000 mile service. Well, it is true that with these very high energy ignition systems that we have these days, with the idea being that the high energy will help burn off more gas and we'll have less emissions, they go through spark plug wires like they never did in the past. So when they say, well, you need a set of spark plug wires, I could go along with that. Okay, 30,000 miles, 60,000 miles, maybe not a bad idea, not a bad investment. Look at the owner's manual again. It will tell you at what point in time you need to maintain those things. The other part that I would say is in a tune-up these days that we didn't have in those days is what they call the throttle body. And you're going to say, Robbie, I thought this wasn't going to be a technical video. Well, I got to tell you a little bit. The throttle body is part of the throttle. So when you put your foot on the gas, the throttle body is actually like a butterfly valve, and that opens up, lets the air inside the engine. Really cool stuff. Well, back in the carburetor days, the gasoline would drip down over that butterfly and keep it nice and lubricated. We don't have carburetors anymore. We have fuel injection. They're sitting in the cylinders or in the intake manifold. So the throttle body, that big butterfly valve, doesn't get cleaned. Well, as we talked about how much air comes into an engine, it's an unbelievable amount, way more than you'll ever breathe. And what happens is a lot of gum and whatever gets on that throttle body. So when they say you need a top engine clean, we need to clean your throttle body, they're talking about they got to get that clean, or otherwise you're noticing that when you come off the interstate, your car dies, your check engine light's on, different things like that, because the throttle can't completely close or it can't completely open because it's all gummed up. So that would be part of, again, what I would call a 30,000 mile service, a 60,000 mile service, is that you're going to get a top engine cleaning or a throttle body cleaning. You can be specific and ask and make sure that that's part of the regular maintenance on your car. Brakes are another thing that you normally want to make sure that you want to maintain. Again, a lot of times you'll take it and they say, well, you need brakes, you need brakes. And I always wonder, well, are they 30%, are they 60%? As a used car manager over the years, you know, the big mechanics always try to sell brakes because from their standpoint as a technician, they call that gravy work. They like that kind of work. It's easy to do. They replace the brakes and there's good profit in it. That doesn't mean you don't necessarily need it, but guess what? Your car is equipped with what they call audible. Most cars, you check your owner's manual, are going to find out they're equipped with audible wear sensors that will literally tell you with this sort of a squeaky noise when your brakes need to be replaced. And in my particular situation, I wait until I hear that. The second I hear it, I go get the brakes done. But at that point in time, I don't have to guess they need to be done, because at that point in time, they need to be done. But before that, then I'm wasting brake material and literally wasting money by it. When they tell me I need brakes, but I'm not hearing anything, then how is it that I know that I need brakes? So I'm a little bit cautious when it comes to just throwing on brakes. Again, you have a trusted mechanic, you have that discussion, or your owner's manual says something different, you go by that. But Robbie's rule of thumb is, hey, they're going to tell me when they need to be replaced. The last part of maintenance I'm going to talk about that is kind of near and dear to my heart is your parking brake. Okay? The reason why it's called a parking brake is because when you're parked, you're supposed to put it on. Now, had somebody known how to use their parking brake, I wouldn't have spent a year in a wheelchair, because unfortunately I was sitting at the back of my Jeep when the man uphill from me didn't set his parking brake, got out of the Jeep, it rolled down and crushed me between the two cars. So you can see parking brake's kind of important to me, but unfortunately I also lost a dear friend because she got out of her car with it running, and one of her children got up front and pulled the car into gear. She ran out trying to catch it. Guess what? She got run over. She was killed because she didn't set her parking brake. Here's another reason to use your parking brake. If you don't use it, especially in the Northeast, you're going to lose it. Because every time you engage your parking brake, it lubricates the system so that it will continue to work. And so part of maintaining your parking brake is literally simply using it, and it's meant to be used every single time you get out of your car, whether it's a manual transmission or not. The other thing that it does is on an automatic transmission, it will reduce the wear on what they call the prawl, the part that actually keeps the car in park. Because if you're on a hill and you put it in park and that car's sitting up against that prawl, guess what? It's putting wear and tear on it. It's wearing out your transmission. If you would set your parking brake, you'll find the car is easier to put into gear on that hill, and it'll also save a lot of wear and tear on the transmission. And who knows, you might save some poor Christian car guy's leg at some point in time. One of the regular emails that I get all the time as a Christian car guy is, Robby, how do I find a good mechanic? Because the cars are complicated these days, and I don't want to do a video and tell you to go out and how to do all this stuff. I'd rather tell you how to get a good mechanic that does this for a living. He does it every single day, and he becomes very proficient at it, like whatever it is that you do for a living. So here's a couple of what I would call time-tested techniques, very good ones. Number one, hopefully you belong to a nice Sunday school class. Make a prayer request before the Sunday school class. God is interested in every part of your life. You say, Lord, you say to the class, I'm looking for a good Honda mechanic. I'm looking for a good, my daughter's going to Seattle, to college. I need a good Seattle Honda technician. Whatever it is, that you make that prayer request, that you're doing a number of things. Obviously, you know, God is going to provide, but many times there'll be somebody right there in the class that knows a very good technician, and right after the class they'll come and tell you. The second, more worldly approach is, and I've used this over the years, is that, you know, a nurse will often know who the best doctors are. Well, it's similar in the car business. In the parts people know who the good mechanics are. The reason is the bad mechanics, they replace parts. And when they replace parts, they don't often fix the problem, so they have to return the parts. So the parts guy is sitting there going, I know this guy, he returns everything I ever give her, to, you know, trying to hunt problems. So the parts guys know the good mechanics. Now, the auto parts store down the street, the AutoZones and whatever, they usually don't service mechanics. You'll usually find the NAPAs or certain part stores in your town, the auto electric places, service the mechanics. Or at the particular dealership that you go to the parts counter first and ask the guy at the parts counter who's been there the longest. Who's been there the longest? Okay, who's your best transmission? Because they're going to be different. Who's your best brake guy? Who's your best drivability guy? My car's going da-da-da-da. Who's the best drivability guy? That parts guy is going to know because he deals with them every day, and he knows who's returning the parts. All right, moving through the life cycle of ownership of a car. You know, we've talked about how you go about buying a car. We've talked about how you maintain a car. But the tragic part in the Christian car guy's life, the part I never want to think about, is if you were going to sell your car, because I believe that you ought to name your car like I've named Old Red, just like Rachel named her 64 Comet Chariot, that this is a member of the family, and you just don't let them go. You keep them like your tractor. They've been out in the elements for 50 years. They'll last as long as you do if you love them and you cherish them. That's how I feel. But there are times it may come where you may need to sell a car because you've changed jobs or whatever the situation. And when that happens, you get to make a decision. Am I going to trade that car, or am I going to try to sell that car myself? And that's a decision that sometimes you may need to actually trade the car. There are times that I would recommend that people do that. Some people are not comfortable at all having people come to their home, strange people, whatever. They're not comfortable with that. Well, if you're not comfortable with talking with people, probably not a good idea for you to sell your car yourself. Of course, you might get a nephew or a friend or somebody to sell it for you, but you don't want to bring that on yourself if you're uncomfortable doing it. There are other times that you may want to trade the car is where you know that I don't want to spend the $2,000 to put a transmission in that car, or I don't feel like I need to do this, that, the other to get the car up to where I'm proud to sell it and where I would really feel good about somebody taking ownership in that. Now here comes the part where the Christian car guy really wants to share something with you. Do not disclose to a car dealer that a car has a problem. I mean, you are passing off that to him. You know what he's probably going to do? Oh, I traded for this car and he didn't, all of a sudden I found out it needed a transmission. He's going to send it to the auction. He's not going to tell the auction it has a transmission problem. The auction's going to sell it to another guy who's not going to know it has a transmission problem. And at some point in time, somebody's going to end up with a car with a transmission problem, and they didn't pay for a car that didn't have a transmission problem, and it's just plain not honest. Okay? So you're not necessarily ripping off the car dealer. There's a customer somewhere along the way that's going to get ripped off. Not to mention you shouldn't rip off a car dealer, but just so that the point isn't lost, somewhere along the way somebody's going to pay for something that they didn't necessarily. So don't not disclose a problem, but that's going to be part of the decision as to whether or not you're going to trade that car or sell it yourself. But let's just say that you know you've got a great car and you want to sell it yourself, and you've made that decision. Well, the thing that we've found in the used car business over the years is reconditioning is the key to getting the most for your car. In other words, I'm going to make that car as much like brand new as I possibly can. I can tell you one of my favorite stories is my used car manager used to drive me crazy sometimes, honestly, because he wouldn't do all the stuff to get a car looking as sharp as it would be. And we traded for this convertible, and he thought we were a little high in it. So he decided, gee, I'm not going to replace that steering wheel cover that looked nasty. And so the steering wheel cover just looked horrible. It was a beautiful car, had leather interior, all this stuff, but the thing was, everybody that sat in the car thought, yeah, you put that steering wheel in your hand and it felt horrible. Well, we sat on the car for almost 6 months before one day I did a used car inspection. I go, what are we doing trying to sell this convertible with a bad steering wheel cover? Well, Robby, it's going to cost $400 for another steering wheel cover. We'll just put one of those, Kmart specials on it. I said, nah. I mean, it's a $14,000 car. It needs a steering wheel cover. Order one. So guess what? He orders the steering wheel cover, and within 6 days after we put the steering wheel in the car sold. Simple things like this make all the difference when it comes to selling a car. The first thing that somebody's going to do when they come and look at your car, they're going to look at the tires. If the tires are not at least 3/4, replace the tire. I know that's hard, but I'm going to tell you, when I looked at a car, the first thing I always looked at was the tires. As a used car manager, if the tires weren't standing tall, like they almost look brand new, because that's going to be the first impression when somebody walks up to that car besides the paint. They're going to look at the paint, then again, it's going to be clean, it's going to be waxed, and they're going to look at the tires. Then they're going to open up the car, and what does it look like? It's details that make a difference when it comes to selling a used car. So when you think about selling this car, how much is it going to really cost to recondition it properly? I got to get the trunk looking good. I got to get the door jambs looking good. Every little single place that I can make that car look good, I want to look good. In fact, it's not a bad idea to go out to a professional detailer, somebody who can really make the engine look good and that kind of thing, and spend $150 to get a complete detail job. That might be the best $150 you spend. Another thing that you want to consider is how much time is it going to take to sell this particular car, and what's the current market like? About 1.5 years ago, when the price of gas plummeted, or didn't plummet, it skyrocketed over $5 a gallon. There were so many SUVs on the market, it was insane, and everybody thought, well, I need to dump my SUV in order to save gas. Well, I don't want to know how much of a bloodbath Americans took trying to get rid of cars for gas mileage, because when they lost $10,000 in resale value overnight, that buys a lot of gas, and those people who held on, guess what? As soon as the price of gas went back down to $2 or whatever, you saw the resale value of SUVs start to come up amazingly. Kind of surprised me, but nonetheless, don't be so quick to make those adjustments because of gas mileage, and you got to consider the market and what's going on right then. It's like a minivan. Always sells better in the spring. You don't want to say, oh, it's time to sell my convertible in November because I don't get to enjoy the sun this year. No, go ahead. That same convertible will probably sell more in March than it would have sold in November, even though it's 4 months older and it has another 3,000 or 4,000 miles on it. So consider the time and consider the market when you go to selling your used car. Another thing, when you sell a car and you go to buy a car, in a lot of states, in most of the states actually I've sold cars in, there's a sales tax benefit that the dealers have in trading cars. You get to take the cash value of the car up against your sales tax because you paid tax on that one car, so they're not going to make you pay for 2 cars. So when you go to make this evaluation, should I sell this car myself or should I trade it? One of the easy things you can do is you can go to a car dealer, and CarMax will usually do this. They won't do it anymore like they used to on SUVs, but they will do it on most cars. They'll simply give you a cash price that they'll pay for your car right then. Well, guess what? Once they give you that amount of money, you now have a baseline and say, okay, well, if CarMax is willing to give me $6,000 for my car, I can assure you CarMax plans on making $2,000 when they sell your car. So you now know, okay, once I recondition this car and whatever, I should be able to get $8,000 for this car based on the facts that CarMax would give me 6. So that gives you a baseline. Plus, you also know in a fallout position, I got to get rid of this car. I can go get a check for $6,000. So if CarMax won't do that in your market, you might try some other used car dealers. Just say, how much would you give me a check for this car? Before you go trade it, because at least you'll know what they call an actual cash value. We use that in the car business to determine, because when you go to trade a car, people would show you that they're giving you $4,000 for that car. But what they're really doing is they're taking their $10,000 car and discounting it too, and they only really gave you $2,000 for your car, so the difference was $6,000. What you didn't know is if you'd walked in to buy that car and pay cash, they just sold it to you for $8,000, and so all your actual cash value of your car was $2,000. This is why I like the CarMax approach, or another car dealer that will tell you, okay, we'll give you this much for your car. You'll get a pretty good idea of what the actual cash value of your car if you're going to trade it, so at least you'll know, okay, this car is worth this much in cash if I need to go unload it right this very second. Another critical part of the value of your used car and anybody's used car is what I call the pedigree. That is where it comes in very handy. Someone like Rachel, who had the 540,000 mile Comet, even though she's never sold the car, she knows every battery she's put in, you know, all those 16 free ones she's got. She's got every service that was ever done to the car. She has what she originally paid for it. She has every birthday earmark. She has pictures of all the car along the way. Can you imagine if you went to buy Chariot, that was her car, she named it, and you saw all that stuff laid out? Did that car have a pedigree? Do you know who had it originally? Do you know when it was serviced? Do you know every single thing about the car? That's what you call a pedigree. So think about it. When you buy that car, are you keeping those kind of records? Do you have a notebook that's just the records of your particular car? But also, when you go to buy a car, are you looking for the pedigree? Or when you're getting your pedigree together to sell your car, why not go ahead and pay for your own Carfax so that people ahead of time, you don't get surprised by something that was in that Carfax that you didn't know about, so that you've got all that stuff ready. And when you're selling that used car, I can't tell you the used cars I sold because I simply laid out the pedigree to the car. I sold this car new, you know, the owner was this, they serviced it here, here's all the records, whatever. How do you feel about buying a car like that knowing you're going to keep it 10 years versus one, well, they got it at an auction somewhere, you know, I bought it. It's a huge difference, just like when you're buying a registered dog. You know, you want to make sure that you sell a registered used car. All right, now you've got your pedigree together, you've got some pricing information, you've done your research and all that. Now, how am I going to advertise this car? Well, that's another critical part of selling your own car. And what I always say is, why not take advantage of the newspaper? In most cities, they will give you 3 lines for $30, or, you know, it's 30 words for $30, or something along like that. They won't give a car dealer that but they want to get your business in the classified section of the paper. So go ahead and check out your newspaper. You might find it's really inexpensive. 30 days for $30. They always have a deal for the classified section because they want to put a lot of used cars in that. So it's not a bad deal, 30 days for $30. But when you're writing that ad, I know it sounds a bit schmucky, but you just go ahead and make it sound like the most flowery car you've ever heard in your life. You don't want to say it's a blue car. You want to say it's a light metallic Baltic blue. You know, you want to give them all the words. You want to give plenty of adjectives. Only driven on, you know, this. And the other thing that always is good in writing an ad is tell them it's urgent. You know, I've got to sell, need to sell it now. So when I'm reading that ad, this sounds like the most beautiful car I've ever seen in my life, babied since it was birth. And then this person's desperate to sell it. Guess what? That's a good ad. That ad will get a very quick response. You want to incorporate the good things about the car, the pedigree if at all possible, and then give them the real reason. Don't lie, but tell them the real reason you've got to sell it right now. I've just changed jobs. I got to sell this car. The second place that I would want to advertise it is in Auto Trader. Auto Trader, a lot of people don't realize, when you put it in that, it also goes on their online site. And Auto Trader has more cars online, I believe, than just about anybody. You might try Craigslist as well. It's free. The nice thing about Auto Trader is a lot of people I know, that's the first place they go when they want to buy used cars, and they search Auto Trader for it. And it's not the magazine that I'm interested in Auto Trader. I would be more interested in what they provide as far as internet. And again, if that's affordable and within your budget, I would look strongly at Auto Trader. Then, how are you going to display the car? You know, if you see one of those lots where people allow you to put the car out there and it gets a lot of frontage, you want to make it. Don't go cheap when it comes to getting the for sale sign. Make that baby look good. And if you got to get somebody to hand paint it, make it look wonderful. Always put the price on it. Make sure you got a clear phone number, and drive around with it in the car if nothing else. But if you can park it in a very high visibility place with a big beautiful sign, and your sign looks better than everybody else's sign, your car looks better, guess what? You're going to be the first person to get a call. Again, just like we talked about, if you're trading the car, if you're selling it to somebody, complete disclosure. If you don't want to fix that little button, whatever it is, make sure that you've got it written in your notes somewhere to that person that you're telling them that this didn't happen, because you don't want that to come back. And again, there's nothing like complete disclosure and having a situation where you can sign off on the deal and everybody feels good. When it comes to the price, I know people say, well, I need to mark it up $1,000 so I can come down. Wrong. You're playing games. I would just, and I did this as a car dealer, believe me, I put the price on it that I could take for the car. Because if I put it up $2,000, nobody calls because the car was too high. I simply put the price, and if they want to negotiate it, just say, no, I marked it this way because I knew that was a fair price, and that's the price I've got for it. You know, that's what I want. And then keep, just like the other way, keep following up on the person. You've got their phone number or whatever, and at some point in time, if you need to lower the price to sell it, you can do that. But start out with a price that you really feel like is your bottom price, and that way you won't have to wonder, gee, I wonder if I'd have come down something, if I'd have gotten more calls or whatever. Go ahead and start, and most people way overvaluate. I can tell you, having appraised more cars than I can know very few people came in and say, Robby, that's really a fair price you offered for me for my car. A lot of people think their cars are worth a lot more than they are. All right, well, hopefully you'll never have to sell your car. That would be a disappointing thing to me, but I always like to close my radio show, and I would like to close this video with some thoughts about how does God fit into this exactly. And I would like to relate just for a minute, what is the similarity between your first car? Do you remember your first car? Can you think about it? And Easter. What are the similarities? Well, your first car, if you remember, mine was a 1960 Rambler American. It looked like an upside-down bathtub. But when I had it, I had freedom. All of a sudden, I could go across the street. I mean, I could go across town. I could go up on the Mesa. I lived in New Mexico. I could go all these places, and I didn't have to check with anybody. That first car meant freedom. Well, the neat thing is Easter represents that same kind of freedom. What kind of freedom? It's the freedom from sin. You see, it's that sin that holds us back in so many different ways that God just simply doesn't want you to live that way. And in Israel's case, on the first Passover, think about the freedom that they have when all of a sudden they were free from the Egyptians. They got free from slavery. Well, you can be free on Easter from your slavery to sin. But, you know, God's got this set of keys for you for your first car, and He wants to hand them to you, but there's some rules of the road that you got to understand in order to be able to take advantage of this freedom. The first thing you got to do is you got to believe. You got to believe that Jesus really did die to pay the price for the things that you've done wrong. They call that sin. Do you really believe that? Do you believe it in your heart? The second thing you got to do in order to take those keys and understand the rules of the road is you have to be able to confess that. You have to be able to say, you know what, God? I have made a lot of mistakes, and I've done this and that again. Can you forgive me? You know, it's just like with your own dad. You know, maybe you wrecked the car, whatever. Did you ever notice that you felt a lot worse until you had a chance to go share it with him? And many times if you had a loving dad, you know, he put his arms around you and said, well, that's okay. You know, now you can have this offer of forgiveness. Well, your dad wants to hand you these keys, but you've got to be able to admit, you know, I can't make it without you. There's no way that I can. All right, a last word. For some of the car manufacturers, a lot of people are concerned with, you know, what in the world has happened in the auto industry that would lead to some of the turmoil that's happened in the past with General Motors and with Chrysler. And I would say that there are two solutions to the car business, and God gave them both to us. It's an interesting thing. The first one is simply love your neighbor as yourself, or we called it the golden rule. What happened was, if you think about it, Henry Ford, how did we build the car companies in America? Henry Ford had the idea, gee, I want to build a car that the guys on the assembly line would be able to afford to buy. I want to build a car that will put America on wheels, people that the average farmer could drive and things like that, because before that, cars were too expensive. And so Henry Ford set about having that as a number one value if he wanted to get his own workers to be able to afford to buy a car. And so he had a different box he thought out of. He said, gee, I bet I could get the people that ship me some of those parts to put them in a certain crate size so that I could use the wood to make the floorboards of my cars. He used that kind of creativity and that kind of commitment to his neighbor in order to put all those Americans to work building Model Ts, then Model As, and on it went. And Louis Chevrolet and Walter P. Chrysler, they all had the similar idea. Look, we can buy an inexpensive car that we can get America driving, but at the same point in time, think of the millions of Americans that have worked over the years building those good, inexpensive cars. Well, somewhere along the line, somebody in General Motors or somebody in one of those companies figured out, gee, if we make cars more expensive, we can make more profit. And unfortunately, they fell into the idea that, gee, I can make a Cadillac on a Chevrolet chassis. See, at one time, a Cadillac was the faster car. The Lincoln was the more powerful car. There was a lot of difference. But then they got the idea, gee, I can take a Chevrolet chassis and I can put a Cadillac on it, and the same car that cost me $2,000 to build, I can now sell for $4,000. Or I can sell it for $8,000, or on it went up until nowadays, they're taking a car, a Chevy Tahoe sells for $40 or $50, the Escalade may be $70 or $80. And if you watch the commercials, a lot of times in the past we've seen them promoting the more expensive models rather than getting back to, let's find a way to sell Americans an inexpensive car. Go back to Henry Ford, go back to Volkswagen, take a look at what Mr. Honda did when he brought cars into the country. He was looking for a way to put the average American in a car, or the average American to work. If General Motors, if Chrysler, if Ford, if our local manufacturers would say, gee, I want to have the least expensive car in the market. I want to make sure that I've got a good quality car that Americans could afford to buy that was as good looking. And I take, for example, the Challenger. I would venture to tell you that if Chrysler really wanted to, they could build that Challenger in a model that could be sold for in the neighborhood of $12,000 or $14,000. How many of those cars would they sell? More importantly, how many Americans would they be putting back to work? And then how much profit could they make off the sheer volume? It worked for Henry Ford. It can work again. So that's the number one problem. Number two problem may sound similar, because the first one was, what, love your neighbor as yourself? Well, this one you probably heard too. It's called love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and with all your soul. Because what we've done is we're looking for the wrong Savior. You see, we turn to the government, we turn to our money, we turn to our own intellect, we turn to all these things as to be our Savior. But the thing of it is God wants to hear from us. He's dying through all these things that have happened to just have somebody from General Motors, somebody from Chrysler, somebody from your house, somebody from my house call him. Just like when my son, I'll never forget, he one time drove his car off into the ditch in a rainstorm. It's my favorite phone call I ever got from my son. He said, Dad, I just ran off into the ditch. Now, sure, I was terrified that he was hurt and all those things, but then I thought, my son trusted me enough to call me, and he had faith in me, and he shared with me a real issue. Well, your heavenly Dad's just like that up there. He's waiting to hear from you. What is it that you're struggling with? You know, what is it that you can't manage? And guess what? He's got that wisdom. He promises it, that he'll give it to you, and he'll give it to you amply. If General Motors, if Chrysler would love them, or Ford, or any auto manufacturer would love their neighbor as theirself, and they would turn to the right Savior, we would be amazed at the Americans we could put back to work, and we could build this auto industry back into the power it once was. Well, thank you so much for spending time with the Christian Car Guy. You can find all these resources at ChristianCarGuy.com. Be sure and listen to our show on the Truth Radio Network or on Sirius 161.